You're paying a new tax, and no one told you about it. It is not coming from the IRS with a scary letter in your mailbox. It is hidden right there in every grocery bag you carry, every clothing tag you check at the store, and every car repair bill that makes you wince. Welcome to the reality of Trump's trade war, where tariffs are functioning just like a sneaky, unavoidable tax that's draining American wallets across the country. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on exactly how these policies are driving up prices at every turn, supercharging inflation in ways you can feel, and hitting your family ES budget to the tune of up to 1-800 extra costs every single year. Stick around, because I'm about to walk you through the hard data from top economic research, the unstoppable chain reaction it triggers across the economy, and the very real, everyday ways it's punching holes in your personal finances. Let ES break it down from the very beginning so everyone is on the same page. What exactly is a tariff? At its core, it is nothing more than a tax that the U.S. government imposes on goods coming into the country from abroad. Imported products like electronics from China, steel and aluminum from Canada or Europe, auto parts from Mexico, and even everyday lumber used in home construction. Under Trump's aggressive 2025 trade policies, he ramped these up dramatically. We're talking 60% tariffs on a wide range of Chinese-made products, a solid 25% on steel and aluminum imports from virtually everywhere, additional hits. On automobiles and parts coming over from Mexico and Canada, and steep duties on Canadian lumber, that's essential for American builders. Importers, those are the companies bringing these goods into the U.S., have to pay the tariff up front to U.S. Customs at the border. But here's the real kicker that nobody talks about enough. Those companies don't just swallow that cost and stay in business. Instead, they pass along most of it, typically 80% to 90% or even more, directly to everyday American consumers like you and me through higher retail prices on store shelves. Top economists at the Yale Budget Lab have crunched the latest numbers on this, modeling the full impact of Trump's 2025 tariff package. Their estimate? These policies will push overall consumer prices up by about 1.2% in the short run, and that's a conservative figure based on real-world pass-through rates from past tariff waves. Now, put that into dollars and cents for a typical American household. If your family brings in around $80,000 a year, the 0.2% price increase across all your spending translates to a loss in buying power equivalent to $1,300 to $1,700 annually. We're not talking about some abstract economic theory here that, yes, real money you could be spent on a family vacation, paying down debt, or just covering the basics without stress. It's not pocket change. It's a direct hit to your standard of living. The St. Louis Federal Reserve backs this up with their own detailed analysis, confirming that Trump's 2025 tariffs are adding roughly 0.5 percentage points to headline PCE inflation, the key measure the Fed watches, this year alone, and about 0.4 percentage points to core PCE inflation, which strips out food and energy volatility. Turning to NBER research combined with fresh retail sales data, we see that tariffs implemented so far have already boosted the Consumer Price Index, CPI, by approximately 0.7 percentage points, and the price growth for imported goods has been happening at twice the speed of domestic products. ORF America, building on Yale's work, recaps the raw household pain even more starkly. The average American family is facing around $1,800 in direct costs from these tariffs in 2025. And at not spread evenly. Certain categories are getting hammered hardest. Apparel prices are surging 17% purely from tariff effects. Food prices are jumping 2.8%. Furniture, consumer electronics, and car parts rank among the most brutally affected, with double-digit increases ripping through those sectors. Now let S zoom out to see the full chain reaction that makes this problem so vicious and self-perpetuating. It like a row of dominoes that keeps toppling for months or even years. It starts with the tariff hit. Importers' costs rise immediately. Companies, whether big retailers like Walmart or manufacturers using imported parts, pass through 80-90% of that burden to consumers to protect their profit margins. Retail prices climb across the board. Suddenly, your real wages start shrinking because inflation is eating away at every paycheck before you even spend it. The Federal Reserve steps in to fight this imported inflation by hiking interest rates or holding them high longer than they otherwise would. Borrowing costs then soar. Think 30-year mortgage rates stuck at 7% or higher. Credit card APRs pushing 20% and beyond, auto loans becoming unaffordable. Economic growth inevitably slows as businesses cut back on investment and hiring. Jobs become scarcer, especially in retail, construction, and even some manufacturing sectors. Yale's models project a 0.5 percentage point drop in U.S. GDP for 2025, followed by another 0.4 percentage point decline in 2026. Translate that to the job market. It means roughly 490,000 fewer jobs by the end of this year. with unemployment rates ticking up by 0.3 to 0.6 percentage points, depending on how aggressive the tariffs stay. You don't have to take my word for how this feels in everyday life. Let us make it personal with concrete examples you'd probably noticing right now at your local stores. Groceries first. That 2.8% tariff-driven hike on imported food items translates to about $100 more per month at the checkout for a typical family of 4, whether it's avocados from Mexico, seafood from Asia, or staples affected by supply chain ripples. Clothing and apparel. The 17% surge means an extra $200 per person every year on basics like jeans, shirts, and kids' outfits. Stuff you need, not luxuries. If you're building or renovating a home, Canadian lumber tariffs are pushing average new home prices up by a whopping $8,900 according to builder estimates, because wood is a massive input cost. Car repairs and maintenance. Imported parts from abroad now cost 10 to 15% more, so that brake job or transmission fix just got pricier by hundreds of dollars. Electronics like TVs, smartphones, and laptops expect 10 to 20% price jumps as components from tariff-hit countries flow through the supply chain. It's not one big bill, it's death by 1,000 tiny cuts, quietly draining your wallet every time you shop. So with all this damage piling up, who's really footing the bill for Trump's tariffs? The president keeps repeating that catchy line, China pays the tariffs. It sounds great on the campaign trail, but cold, hard data from leading economists completely kills that narrative dead. Breakdowns from Harvard researchers and Goldman Sachs economic teams show that U.S. consumers like you are absorbing about 55% of all tariff costs right now through higher prices, and that share could easily climb to 70% or more as companies fully adjust. Businesses themselves shoulder around 22% in thinner margins or cost cutting, while foreign exporters, China, Mexico, Canada, the EU, pick up just 18% through slightly lower profits on U.S. sales. Retailers aren't charities. They don't eat the costs. They mark up accordingly. Look at a real-world example from Trump's first-term tariffs. A comprehensive 2024 academic study tracked washing machines hit with new duties and found near-complete pass-through. Retail prices shot up 12% almost immediately, while sales volumes only dipped slightly as families had no real alternatives. Now let's drill deeper into the inflation angle, because this is where tariffs create a double-barreled problem for everyday Americans. The Federal Reserve is out there fighting an inflation fire that these policies partly ignited themselves. The St. Louis Fed's latest modeling, incorporating insights from NBER papers, ORF America reports, and their own projections, pegs tariffs as adding anywhere from 0.5 to 0.9 percentage points to overall 2025 inflation rates. That is not a minor blip. It's enough to force the Fed to keep interest rates elevated much longer than if tariffs were an T in the mix. The result? Your 30-year fixed mortgage stays locked at 7% or higher instead of dropping toward 5 to 6%. Credit card average APRs hover around 20% or worse, and even auto loans carry 8 to 10% rates. It's a brutal double whammy. You would be paying higher prices directly from tariffs on goods, plus amplified borrowing pain that makes big purchases like homes or cars even tougher to afford. Another big myth we need to bust head on. Tariffs protect American workers and bring jobs back home. It sounds patriotic, but the numbers tell a different story. Reports from the Kansas City Fed and Yale Budget Lab show that even manufacturing, the supposed beneficiary, ends up getting hurt despite the protection. Supply chains fracture as companies scramble for pricier domestic alternatives that don't always exist at scale. Input costs for U.S. factories soar because they rely on imported steel, components, and materials. Bankruptcies in tariff-hit sectors have spiked by 20% as smaller firms can't handle the squeeze. Retail suffers from thinner consumer wallets, construction slows from higher material costs, and the ripple spreads wide. The net effect is an economy-wide slowdown, not a manufacturing boom. Let us do a category-by-category deep dive so you can see exactly where these tariff markups are hiding in your life. Furniture and home goods. Up 15-20% thanks to tariffs on wood, metal, and fabrics from key suppliers. Electronics, chips, screens, and components from Asia are jacking up smartphone and laptop prices by 8 to 12% on average. Car parts and vehicles, those 25% tariffs translate to $1,000 or more extra on the sticker price of new cars, plus higher repair bills. Food and groceries, Mexican produce like tomatoes and berries, Canadian dairy and meats. These imports add steadily to your weekly tab beyond that 2.8% average. Even toys, shoes, and kids' clothing. Stuff for the family isn't cheap anymore, with apparel leading the pack at 17%. Here's the unvarnished bottom line. Trump's tariffs are your new invisible tax, hitting the average household for $1,300 to $1,800 every year in higher costs alone. They're fueling stubborn inflation, slowing economic growth to a crawl, and eroding jobs across multiple sectors without delivering the promised riches for America. Next time you hear politicians crowing about trade war wins or making China pay, remember who the real losers are. You and millions of families standing in line at the checkout, watching prices climb with no end in sight. This is just the start of the series. Coming up, deep dives like the $1 to $700 household hit explained step by step, tariffs versus the Fed, who's really to blame for high rates, and more. If this opened your eyes, smash that like button, subscribe for the full breakdown, and drop a comment below sharing your own stories of price hikes you've noticed lately. Thanks for watching. Arming yourself with the truth is the first step to protecting your wallet. See you in the next one.